Google Maps, something like that, right? So join a company that's, even in the Saudi context, growing, if that's really what you're after. As I already said, you're not the boss. Everybody else is your boss. And it's called servant leadership. It's a whole thing, but it's the sad fact of the matter. And the last one is actually quite important. It can be psychologically quite hard. You're going to have some really difficult times. Let's say you lose a big customer, or your investor says no. You're going to hear 90% no as a founder trying to make your way through funding. And there's real, mental health issues that can come with it. There's a strong correlation between being a founder and suffering from bipolar disorder. Like it's a real thing, and it's becoming more and more recognized in the startup community as something that we need to talk about and we need to discuss. So definitely, you need to, if you're going into it, you need to make sure you have a very strong founding team that's there to support you through the hard times. B, you want to make sure you maintain your family relationships and keep them strong. And C, you want to make sure you maintain all your friendships, basically all your support networks you can lean on. You want to keep those healthy and not sacrifice them at the expense of your business. And that's a hard learned lesson for a lot of founders. So that's the end of the talk, you guys. Welcome to leave. In case I've scared everybody. But let's say you're crazy enough and you still want to do it. Why do it? And the only reason you would really want to do it is an irrational reason, which is passion. It's that drive that you can't not do it. The idea, or the journey, the adventure is so strong in your mind, and you're so driven to pursue it that you just can't not. And that's really it. Just like someone who goes to climb a mountain, it's full of inconveniences and dangers and perils, but you're just compelled by the journey. You're compelled by the accomplishment, and that's really sort of the only valid reason to go into being a founder or starting your own business. All right, so if you're still with me at this point, let's say you've decided to take the leap and go and do your own business. And the first thing you got to do is throw your passion completely out the window. Okay, forget everything I said. Passion is probably the number one thing that ruins a business. The moment you've actually made the crazy rational decision to do this, you got to think back at that fact of 92% of people in your position will fail. And you gotta get immediately really, really smart about how do you maximize your chances of success. What you don't want to do is forego income, forego your family, forego your mental health, and then not do it in a smart way that actually maximizes your chances of success. And the way to do that is to really, really, really lean on data, lean on experimentation, and lean on metrics in the way you construct your business from the earliest stage, from the idea stage. A lot of great founders are incredibly passionate about an idea, despite the fact that they maybe see signs that there's no market for it, or it's not going to be the breakout success that they hope it's going to be, and they double down, they triple down, and they go for years chasing an idea. So passion, it's necessary to start, but it's also probably the biggest killer of startups. You need to be able to step back and be very analytical about what you're doing. And I'm sorry to say, but a lot of times you have to actually kill your idea and move on to something else. And being able to keep that cool analytical head on your shoulders is critical. All right. So a couple of things on that. Constant risk analysis, prioritization, mitigation. So that's probably the number one job of a startup CEO. Is you're a risk mitigation machine. You're at all points in time, you're thinking about what's the next biggest risk in front of my business, and how do I get in front of it, and how do I mitigate it, and how do I prioritize the risks. Let's give a simple. I'm going to use this coffee shop example because I think a lot of people in Saudi are opening coffee shops now. And there's some really great coffee shops even in our neighborhood here. But let's say I wanted to open another coffee shop, so I started running through the risks in my head right away. And so, do people drink coffee? People drink coffee. That's not a big risk, right? Am I going to be able to hire people to work in my coffee shop? Probably. I mean, there's laborers available. Am I going to be able to find space to host my coffee shop? Probably. I mean, there's construction all around us. I'll be able to find a place. But the biggest risk really is my coffee shop going to stand out? Our customers going to come to me? There's so many great coffee shops. How am I going to stand out? And so if I were doing a coffee shop, immediately that's the first risk that jumps to mind. And immediately my first role as a founder is to think, how do I mitigate and how do I test for this risk? So, do I go and try to attract people by saying we have the cheapest coffee in town, right? Like one real coffee. Is that too much? Half a real coffee. Sorry?
That's the cheap coffee.
All right, so 5 real coffee because it has to be the cheapest in town. Or do I do the 50 real coffee, the most expensive coffee in town, and try to differentiate myself that way? And there's easy ways to test this. You can literally go to the mall, print out 100 flyers for the cheapest coffee in town, print out 100 flyers for the most expensive coffee in town, and see if people take one or the other. There's actually really cheap ways to de-risk ideas without even renting a space or knowing anything about making coffee. And that's the kind of risk mitigation and experimentation mentality you need to have about every aspect of your business. Focus on measurable experiments and outcomes. Like I said, that what I just described, going to the mall and handing out flyers, that's a real cheap experiment. It's probably going to cost you almost nothing to print out 200 pages of paper at a coffee shop. And it's a measurable outcome. You'll be able to see, did people take the cheap flyer, the expensive flyer? That's already data. And it costs you almost nothing to get. And the most valuable outcome is learning. And we're going to come back to this theme over and over again in this talk. If you did things in the wrong order, let's say you let passion take over, you find a cool piece of real estate, you get really excited about, I'm going to put marble everywhere, it's going to be super cool. You're spending money and you're spending time, and you're not learning. The time you're building out a physical coffee shop, you're not learning anything. If you go and get some stock photo of a different coffee shop that looks like the one you want, and you ask 10 people, do you like it or not? You've learned more than by actually building, and you've spent nothing, right? So learning is really the most important currency here. Not necessarily, tangible assets. Definitely stay away from fixed costs at the early stage as much as possible. Optimize for learnings and for data. Any questions so far? I'm sorry, could you really speak up? If you get hired in a different coffee shop, I mean, it's your choice, and it probably means, if you took the job, it means you probably would be happier in that role. If you really were passionate about doing your own, you probably would have said no. Oh, I see. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So that's going back to the earlier point is, you really want to make sure you have the right skills for the task you're undertaking. So work and then use your work to research. Yeah, so definitely, like anything that helps you learn about your space that you're about to tackle is amazing. And that's what we call like creating an unfair advantage. Am I getting the question right? Yeah, it's you're creating an unfair advantage for yourself. So you're getting ahead of, like, let's say you go and you work at a very expensive coffee shop that does things that only they know how to do, like cold brew. If you learn how to do cold brew, that could be your differentiating thing that you bring to your own coffee shop that no one else knows how to do. So you want to create as much of that kind of know-how and secret sauce. And we'll come back to that. There's actually one of the methods here in the lean startup section actually talks about what is your unique unfair advantage. And that's a great way to build unfair advantage.
Does the advice follow from that a person shouldn't start their startup without having sufficient work experience in delivering and trying to start their startup then?
Definitely. Even if and I mean, you can do it if maybe you have a co-founder that's very deeply involved in the space, right? You don't have to yourself have the experience. Maybe you bring something else to the business, but somebody in there has to, we call it founder problem fit. Like the founder, well, at least one of the founders has to really understand the problem in a unique way. Otherwise you'll never get to a differentiated place where you're doing it differently or better than anybody else. You'll just end up doing a Me Too kind of business that will likely fail. At the early stages, yeah, because generally, unless the fixed cost comes with massive learning, which, like in certain industries is true. Like, let's say you're in biomedical, like you actually need a whole lab, you need a whole bunch of machines to even make the smallest thing that's testable. So in a case like that, it's inevitable. But I think Abdullah and I have had this conversation. I really think you can test a ton about something like a coffee shop that you think is a very fixed cost intensive thing. I really think you can test a lot about it without paying the fixed cost price. And a lot of it is how you think of creative ways to avoid the fixed cost up front. A good example from my mother-in-law is she makes her own tea mix, and all her friends are asking, "Can we have your tea mix? We love your tea, and how do you make this?" And she goes and buys a few different teas, and it's her secret recipe. That's actually a market signal. Like even before she opens a tea place, she already has pull from her network for this product that she hasn't yet built, right? And she's doing it with no fixed cost. And so it's about finding the ways to do that.
So the key is learning.
Absolutely, yeah.
Learning. Go and work for another topic. How do you understand the customers, the process, market better? But I would say for startups, it's better to go observe several coffee shops.
Mhm.
You want to identify the difference.
Absolutely.
That's a cheaper way because time is good asset that there's one coffee shop. So probably what that's not one of the best coffee shop in town. Probably invest 1 month to go and observe the top 10.
Absolutely.
Find the goods and bad. Find your market fit, where you want to have your company.
I think actually both are true for different reasons. So what you're saying is absolutely true because what you're describing is sort of competitive work. You want to work at 10 coffee shops and see, where's the market gap? Like you go to you go to one coffee shop and you notice customers are asking for a thing that nobody else is doing. I think working for it has a different downside because you develop the craft and the skill and the depth. So I think ideally maybe you go work at one coffee shop for 6 months and then you go spy on the 10 top coffee shops.
Yeah.
Go and buy, go sit one day, full day in one coffee shop and observe, and then the next day spend another week going like every day spying on the top 10 coffee shops. And I think you'll get a great like breadth view and depth view that way. Absolutely. Uh-huh. Right. I don't think there's an easy answer, honestly. I think you basically you take all the data you have, and then you go sit in a room or somewhere, and you think and you get inspired. You go take a shower, you get inspired in the shower. There's no recipe for creativity, and wherever you find yourself getting your best ideas, go there and think about it. But I mean, it's all part of the same package. Like even if you sit there independently, get a really good idea, somebody else might already be doing it. So you need the competitive, and then you need also the idea. So it's whatever works for you really. I'm gonna keep going here just because we're super low on time. We have 10 minutes left. Okay, we can just all right, awesome. Okay. So let's talk about the lean startup, and that's how many of you guys heard lean startup, lean methodology? Okay, a few of you. So it's basically a method for finding that product market fit that I described. So shortening your product development cycle and rapidly validating your business model. So it's a framework to do what I've just described. And it's based on this book by Eric Ries, The Lean Startup, which you can get on Amazon. He also has a lot of content on his website. At the end of the slides, there's a reference slide that has linked to all these things. It's also based on Steve Blank, The 4 Steps to Epiphany, which is Steve Blank originated the customer development trend, which is very much an inspiration for the lean startup. So it's a process. It's a way to basically write down your business plan and test it. And probably the key artifact is what they call the lean canvas. And I'm sorry if it's too small to read, but I'll walk you through it. The lean canvas, it's a one-page business plan that lets you really, really, really easily capture the assumptions of for your idea. So it's numbered because you fill it out in this order, and you can easily. I have it open here in a different tab. If you go to leanstack.com, there's actually an interactive tool that has the same thing, and you can just go and type right into it and then print out a PDF. So you don't have to just use this. It's free, and you can make as many of them as you want. But let's go through it in detail here. So the first part you fill out is your customer segments, right? So you go and you brainstorm, who do you think is the potential customer for your idea, and that's a really important one. You want to really be able to identify as specifically as possible who the customer is. And so in the coffee shop idea, are you going for somebody who's on the way to their office and they want to grab a coffee really quickly and they just want the caffeine and don't care? Or are you going for somebody who wants to hang out with their friends and enjoy the ambiance, the music and all that? And that would lead you to design a completely different product. The second step is the problem, and for a coffee shop, the problem is pretty easy. People need caffeine, but, and a lot of, well, actually, no, it's not actually. People need caffeine, but actually people might be going to the coffee shop to hang out, right? So like, what actually is the problem that you're solving? The solution, as you see, is actually left for last because it's probably the least important thing you need to think about and the least important thing to validate. The third thing it encourages you to think about is your revenue streams. So how are you going to make money? For a coffee shop, it's clear, but you might want to consider: are you just selling, coffee? Are you doing delivery? Are you doing, are you selling coffee by the bag? Are you doing a subscription service where Abdullah can sign up for coffee delivered to his house, a coffee bag delivered to his house every week? So think about the revenue streams and channels as a part of that.
What's the starting point before you start filling out this form? I'm assuming anybody who would start filling out the business model canvas would already have a solution in their mind and they're just trying to validate that idea.
Exactly.
So is it the right assumption here to have the solution as the starting point?
Usually, yeah. Usually you already have a solution in mind, and this is a way to write down all of your assumptions and test them. So usually you have something in mind already. You're right. Continuing here, I think 4 is supposed to be the solution. That's because it's missing. 5 is your unique value proposition, and so that's the tricky one. And the way to define it here is a single, clear, compelling message that turns an unaware visitor into an interesting prospect. So here's where you got to come up with like the elevator pitch, or if someone's asking you, how's your coffee shop different? You're going to say cheapest coffee in town. That could be it, right? So something like that. If you have a tech idea, I don't want to make it all physical goods. So if it's a tech idea, a useful way to think about the unique value proposition sometimes is like you hear people say, oh, I'm working on Uber for something. Right, so it's like it's a comparison, or they'll say this movie Aliens is like the movie Sharks but in space. So you gotta think about, a lot of times that's really helpful in conveying to people what you're trying to do. So you can say I'm doing a coffee shop. It's like cough but with board games. It's cough with board games, or, something like that, right? 6 is your channel. So how are you going to reach your customers? And that's a critical one. So if you open a coffee shop, how is anybody going to know? Are people going to drive by the street and see it? And then in that case, you need a massive sign. Are you going to advertise on Facebook? You got to list that channel budget for the ad spend. Are you going to give flyers out in the mall? Are you going to spread through viral word of mouth? Are you going to grow through Instagram? So you want to list your channels and prioritize them. And then it's another thing you can test. You can test which channel is most effective. Like, are people driving by? Like when someone comes and buy a coffee, you can ask them, how did you find out about us? Through Instagram, or because you drove by and saw? And you can figure out where you want to invest in more Instagram ads or in a bigger sign on the street. So channels are important.
If you have visibility for this, for a business model canvas equal for innovative ideas and for proven concepts, or should this be purely used for new ideas?
I think you can apply it to anything, to be honest, if you want to be successful, because even for proven ideas, you still want to focus on this last piece, which is like, what's your unfair advantage, or why would people pick you? Because you never want to do just a strictly Me Too unless you're in a regulated, unless you're a gas station or a regulated, commodity or something like that. But so channels, key metrics, how are you going to identify, success, obviously. And I have a whole thing at the end about how do you write down your metrics. And then, yeah, the unfair advantage is what we were talking about earlier, is if you know how to make coffee in a way that nobody else knows, and it's hard to copy. That's the key piece, is like, you're in the best position if you invent something and you have a patent, and literally you're legally protected from somebody else stealing your idea. But these days, nobody really gets patents anymore. Even in the United States, even in technology, no one gets patents. So you got to think about, is there an unfair advantage? Like, can you track the ecosystem, or do you know something? Do you have unique insight that nobody else does that it's hard to copy? And that's probably the hardest thing, and it's probably will make or break your business if you're able to execute to that point. Take a pause here. Any questions on this one? Because it should be hard to copy. It should be hard for anybody else to get to it. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it's just that. It's just like basically, yeah. It's hard to copy. It's not fair that you have it, but you do somehow. Hopefully, without doing anything illegal, because you don't want to be trading on market data you're not supposed to have access to. That's not a good business. Okay, so that's good. Yeah, so usually you write one, and you should be able to write this in maybe 30 minutes. Honestly, it's meant to be a one pager, and it's meant to be filled out by hand, or so don't spend too much time, and feel free to write many. So because sometimes as you're writing it, you'll find there's flavors of the idea, right? So you'll write one canvas about like a high-end coffee shop, and then be like, oh, what about a real low-end coffee shop? And then you'll write another canvas for that. So these should be print out a stack and fill them out. Pretty quickly, and then how long you should spend validating it. I mean, I think you can prioritize them based on your hunches, and then you just go in order. You test the first one until you either have confidence that it's going to work, or it's one of the things has been disproven. Like, let's say a channel is really hard to access, but you don't have money for ads, then you got to scrap it and try a different one. Generally, you do it together. Yeah, everybody does it, and you sit in the same room and you do it together. Although, you can also do it separately and then try to merge. Right. So that's one tool, and again, this goes back to like basically writing down all the things I said in the beginning. You're gonna try to make experiments for all the key assumptions and the key risks in your business, and this is a great way to capture the risks. Write them down, and then start thinking, how do I experiment? How do I prove that people have this problem? How do I prove this cost structure is going to work? How do I prove I can reach this channel? And you just go devise yourself experiments, and then you move on to the next thing, right? So once you're certain that the problem exists, then you go and test your value proposition. Like people respond to my solution to the problem. And so yeah, it's a great tool to just kind of organize your thoughts in your testing process. Sorry. Number 4, I think is missing. I think it's supposed to be 1, 2, 3 solution. Yeah, I think it's broken. It's the correct sequence. I think you go solution is number 4, because you need this to be able to write the unique value prop. And this is just the way he suggests you fill it out in this order when you're filling it out. Then you can test it in any order you want. I think it encourages you to think about the customer and the problem first, and then the solution after. Because a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about the solution. See the small box he's given you for the solution? Because it's actually like the size of the box actually speaks to the importance of that and how much thought you're supposed to put into it. Yeah. And here they have existing alternatives, which is really the competitors. So you put your competitors here, or what are your customer segments doing today to solve the problem, right? So that's actually the kind of the key pieces.
just to get an idea of what a unique value proposition would be in the tech space.
Yeah.
What was the unique value proposition of Fusebit?
We said the integrations made easy for developers is, that's what our unique value proposition is. We're in the integration space, like helping products connect to each other. So that's what we said. You could, if I give you some, if I can think of some common ones for other tech products. I think the iPod was like 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? I forget. You can find them. It's online. You can search what other tech products used.
The value proposition for Apple was the bicycle for the mind or something along those lines, for the increased efficiency of human productivity.
A bicycle for the mind is great. I mean, it really speaks. Yeah, it's great. And it doesn't even mention what the product is. Neither does the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket. It doesn't talk about it talks about your problem. It talks about how it's going to make your life better. It doesn't actually say a music player, right?
Yeah, but for something like Fusebit, which you're marketing to an audience that is niche, like just programs, right?
Yeah.
Basically, it's just programs.
Yeah, it's just developers. Yeah.
The unique value proposition would be kind of hard to recap, right?
It's tough to write. Yeah, because especially for a technical product, you have to keep the smaller your niches, the more qualifiers you have to add. So like at some point we had it was like 3 sentences. Like it was bad. So it's and it doesn't have to be perfectly descriptive. I think as long as you find something that works well enough and qualifies you with roughly the right customer, like roughly the right customer response to it, it doesn't have to be perfectly correct. That's what we found. So we said integrations made simple for developers. We find that gets us close enough to our target customer segment. And then some of them are gonna, when they find out more, they're gonna be like, that's not for me, and that's fine. We get close enough to the target customer. Because if you start with like a word salad, people will just give up, and they'll just never even come to you.
3 sentences are bad, right?
Huh?
And 3 sentences are bad.
3 sentences, yeah, 1 sentence generally is great. And there's some standard formats for it. Like I think it's like usually for somebody, X solves the problem, unlike the existing alternative. That's one standard format. A good example of that is like, I think there was a pizza chain that said hot pizza delivered to your door in 10 minutes or it's free. So in that case, they say what, for who, and eliminate your objection. What if this is not true? Then it's free. You don't have to worry about it. So there's Eric Ries has a whole chapter on writing UVPs, so you should reference that.
Who do you answer these questions for? Are you answering these just for your own reference, or are you trying to present this to an external investor to?
Right. Well, eventually this is going to make its way to your pitch deck for investment. But really, it's for yourself because this affects how you market and affects what you build. It's mostly for yourself.
There's like investment. How are you getting convinced to invest? You're not certified.
Yeah.
Generally, investors.
Yeah. So the question is, how, if you don't necessarily have the background or the experience, how do you convince someone to invest? Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, to be honest. I think probably the first step would be to develop some of that unfair advantage, develop some skills or know-how of the space. Like investors look for that founder problem fit. They want to make sure you know something. That's the easiest way to get funded is, let's say at your current company, you solve the problem a certain way, and now you have a unique understanding. You've actually solved this problem before. Now you go to an investor and say, I've done it. So it's really hard to do a jump completely cold into a different space and get funded. It's sort of the sad truth of it. Yeah, I think it's best to, like, let's say you're in your current role and you start on the side, learning, tinkering, trying to build up your skill set, or you partner with a founder that already has that. Like there's a lot of founder pairings where like one founder has a strong entrepreneurship streak, can drive, but they're not the subject matter expert, but you find somebody. like Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, right? Like Wozniak was the tech guy. Steve Jobs is the visionary, but not technical guy. And so that was a pairing that was needed to work. Like he needed the credibility of a technical genius person to be able to sell his idea. So yeah, you can short circuit it by finding the right co-founder. I'm sorry? Eric Rees, yeah, it's I have a link at the end of the doc, but this is the name, and the book is The Lean Startup.
Well, we'll be in touch with you guys. Whoever wants the resource, you could ask for them and they'll send it to you, maybe your email or WhatsApp.
We're 10 minutes past. How should we just keep going?
The initial idea we had was to have 30 minutes of talk and then 50 minutes of asking the questions we have prepared earlier, and then 50 minutes of Q&A with the audience. But we think it would be a good idea if we combine the Q&A session with the speech.
Okay.
That's super for you and the audience, I guess.
Yeah. And I love that you guys are asking questions right. So instead of waiting to the end, this is much better. So okay, so let's keep going. So I'm gonna try to finish at 7 in 20 minutes. Okay. Okay, agile development. So this is this step is kind of like the next step after you've built your canvas and you've kind of convinced yourself, okay, there's something here. You've done some testing. So how do you actually deliver the thing in a way that's kind of fast, efficient, and again in line with the objective to learn continuously. So agile. Are you guys familiar with agile development from the? No. Okay. It's mostly a software world concept, but I think it's actually applicable again to almost any business in a way. So there's kind of a few concepts as part of it. One concept is how do you build your minimum viable product, right? And so let's say you're building a car in this example. You can follow the top way of building a car, which is okay. Like I'm gonna build it in terms of like functional pieces. So I'm gonna build some really great wheels first, and then I'm gonna go build, a nice chassis, and then I'm gonna put the interior. But what's the problem with that? Time is passing. This whole time, it's you're losing time. And are you able to show anything to your customer? A wheel does not solve their job. Neither does this or that. So you have to finish your entire development of your product up until its very final perfect state for the customer to be able to give you any feedback at all. And that's a lot of time wasted, unfortunately. And the other thing is, if you've built the wrong thing here, if the customer says, nope, that sucks, then you're back to the drawing board and you had no chance to adapt. If your customer says, oh yeah, you built this, but it's too nice. Maybe I was okay with a simpler car, actually. Then you burnt all this time building a fancy car, and all people want is a basic car. And again, you've wasted time. So the idea behind the minimal viable product is what's the smallest thing you can deliver to your customers that solves the basic problem of your business in a simple way without any of the bells and whistles, right? So his suggestion in this case is if you're building a car, what's the problem being solved is transportation. You're trying to help somebody get from point A to point B. So the fastest way to learn about transportation is to build the simplest possible transportation vehicle, which is a skateboard in this case. And then a skateboard is probably not enough, right? But then you build a scooter, okay, and the scooter like goes quite a bit faster than the skateboard, and maybe some of the car customers can actually now get to work from home on the scooter if they live within 5 minutes of work and it's not Saudi, or it's Saudi in the winter. But then so like the customer's like not super happy, but you're learning, right? They're and one of the most important things you can learn at this stage, they could be customers could say, we love your scooter, we don't need a car. Like if this was Miami, everybody's like, this is great, I can tan and get to work, perfect. I don't want to be stuck inside a car, that sucks. So you're done. You've built the product, you solved the problem. But if not, you can keep going. Then you build the bicycle, you build the motorcycle, and eventually you get to the car. And this whole time you're getting feedback. And obviously the example is not perfect. There's a lot of rework, as you'll see. Like there's not a lot of technology being reused. Like building a bicycle does not teach you much about building a motorcycle. So you're actually, so there's a lot of waste in this. But what you are getting is data from day one. You're getting data, right? And so that's quite a valuable way to think about it.
So when you're creating agile way of developing your products, you're trying to minimize or maximize the usability of what you've done from one stage to the next?
Ideally, yeah. Ideally, you're building in stages so you can learn, but throwing away work to gain opportunity to learn, right? So that's a penalty you're paying.
Is there an argument to be made that the previous approach would be more suitable in a real world example where getting some specific component perfect would maybe lead you to a different business idea or potential collaborations from, say, you made the perfect tire and it's a perfectly suitable idea to change your business to focusing on that specific product instead. So once you've made one with that modular component that works perfectly well, perhaps you should.
I mean, you could try, but at that point you're not executing on a planned. You're not executing against a hypothesis. You're kind of hoping for chance, right? Because you're like really your hope was to build a car, not to build a tire company. So success becomes accidental as opposed to something that's process driven.
I imagine there are many examples in technology companies where a byproducts of this.
Amazon is great. AWS is a great example, basically. But again, AWS was built as a side effect of building a book selling website, right? It's not, and it only happened later. And that's actually, it's a kind of pivot actually where you go and it's called a zoom in pivot where you then find a part of your business that can be resold as a different way, but in a different way. But yeah, I wouldn't suggest just because of that to follow that path. One valid way to do this is like, if you think about building, if what you're building is very well understood, at least a part of it is very well understood, like building a house. If you're building a house, you're probably not going to build it in an agile way. You're not going to first build set up a tent and then build a little shed and then build a small house and then demolish it and then build a bigger house and then you're not going to do that. That's crazy. So when you're building a house, the learning needed in a certain part of building a house is minimal. We know how to build houses, but if you're doing a new product, then you do need all that learning. You do want to test at every phase. But if you don't really have a need for learning or you don't have a need for testing, if you're building something very well understood, then that could be fine. So it's not a one size fits all. But for most new ideas, I like to do this with I think you and I talked about the coffee shop, and you're like, oh, can you really do this for a coffee shop? I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think first you basically sell the beans to your friends, and your friends are like, these are some great beans. Then you open a coffee cart on the side of the road, very little fixed cost. And then you become famous in your coffee cart, and then you graduate to a food truck, and then you graduate to a massive retail space.
You're operating on the assumption that coffee is back to the customer, not any of the additional features.
Fair. Okay. Yep. But
so it's only relatively works.
I think the point is it can be applied to even to physical businesses. It's not necessarily only applicable to technology. This next part, so agile also comes with a process, right? For how do you actually structure the delivery of your idea, and it centers basically around this interplay between your team, and this is devs in this case, and then your stakeholders, which is probably yourself as the CEO or any investors you have. And it goes around this idea of sort of continuous iteration through this cycle, where the stakeholders basically state requirements and then organize them basically in a prioritized sequence. And so like you can think of them saying, okay, build a car, and then you break it down into like build the skateboard, build the scooter, et cetera. And then you deliver each of these pieces through, this is your funnel where you break it down into, okay, for the skateboard, we need someone to do the design, someone to do this part, and you give it to your engineering team, and then you give it to your stakeholders, and then the stakeholders validate, okay, this is, the skateboard, is great, like here's the data from it, we agree, let's proceed to building the scooter. Maybe the stakeholders will say, sorry, like you failed, let's stop. Maybe they'll say, this is great, like we really, you've solved the problem, customers are happy, you don't really need to keep going, right? This idea of sort of a continuous delivery loop between, whoever's working on it, the sort of the execution team, and the the stakeholders. It enables this continuous learning loop as opposed to more traditional planning methods where you try to guess exactly the perfect solution up front, and then you spend years and years in different milestones building it, like planning, getting the design just right, getting the interior design just right, hiring all the staff, buying all the machines, buying all the coffee, launching the coffee shop, and then waiting to see what happens, right? This is a different way of thinking about it. Like actually break it up into these small MVP chunks, minimum testable chunks, and run a rapid loop of validation and sign off by your stakeholders. So basically feed them incremental progress and reflect incrementally on the learnings.
But the feature set you selected, your activation is not based on the compatibility of that product. It's more focused on the truthful, how truly it reflects the vision of the final product, rather than focusing on making profit from smaller stages.
It's
what are you trying to do here? Are you trying to maintain a better financial position throughout the process, or are you trying to get better insights on the final product from
it's all learning. Yeah, it's better. It's all about better insights. Absolutely, it's all about basically like every feature or thing you feed through the funnel gets tested and gets like a lot of things get rejected at some point through prioritization or through user testing eventually, and they just never make it. So it's all about learning at this stage. All right. The PO is like this is a softwareism. It's the product owner. As a CEO, you might be both product owner and stakeholder. But let's say you have investors, then the investors are stakeholders, you're the CEO, and then this is your team. So you're the one that's kind of like helping translate between the investor requirements into work for your team. And this is from a really nice talk from this guy whose name I forget, but I've linked at the end of both of these images are from this very good YouTube video. It's like 30 minutes to watch. Highly recommend it. I've linked it at the end of the slides. All right, last piece, pirate metrics. So metrics are super important. And so we've talked about, one of the things on the lean canvas was what are the key metrics. And so this is a great framework to think about. How do you define your metrics? It's called pirate metrics because the acronym is R, which is how pirates talk. And it's basically it's a five-step model that lets you measure how your business is doing. And it's mostly useful for subscription businesses, but it can easily be adapted to a non-subscription business as well. So this is the funnel. It's got the five stages I discussed: acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. So just explaining them briefly, acquisition is basically how do you get customers? How do customers find you, right? And so for a lot of people, this is marketing, right? So are people finding you through ads? Are people just typing a search term like co-working space in Khobar and finding you that way, right? Like how are people finding you, and what metrics can you attach to that step? Activation is what's the first successful problem-solving, delightful experience that customers have with your product. So in a case of a co-working space, it might be I come in and I see the space and I get excited. This is nice. I'd like to have a desk here. Or maybe I come and I have a free day, and I test out the internet and find out the internet is great. Or attend a technical talk and I'm like, this is great. I should add a slide for always be selling at the end, which is another thing. Retention is now someone has come to you, they've had a positive experience. Are they coming back? Will they come back? These two I actually like to flip. I don't know why he has referral before revenue, but usually it happens in the opposite way. No, they both are. It's fine. So usually it's like, okay, so once they're coming back, eventually they're going to pay for it, right? So, for me to actually even come back, I have to pay. So retention and revenue in the co-working space example happens, really together. And then referral is like, I've told my friends about it. I've told my friends, hey, it's a great space. Why don't you join me? I'm really enjoying it here. And so this is kind of this is a way you can think about the metrics for your new business. In the coffee shop example, the acquisition could be, they drive past you in the street, they remember the name, Activation could be, they come in for the first time and they meet their friend there or something. Retention is they enjoy their experience, they come back, and then they buy a coffee, I guess. And then referral is they bring their friend, right? And so you can think about at every stage of this funnel, what's the right metric. So if you're doing acquisition, let's say you're advertising your coffee shop on Facebook, you can measure the success of your Facebook ads, and for example, tweak your ad copy or what you're talking about in your ads. You're talking about the nice atmosphere. You're talking about the cheap coffee. You're talking about the beans being single origin. You can test a whole bunch of different things and figure out how do you optimize this phase of your funnel. And once your metrics are healthy here, you can do each of these phases independently. Then how are you doing activation? Like, are people coming into the coffee shop, or are they going to your website? What's the first time people like remember you or have some kind of positive experience? And so you can measure that independently. Retention is very easy. Like, that's a lot of coffee shops. Like, once you swipe your credit card, they know that you're the same customer, and in their metrics they can actually tell you're a returning customer. Or they might give you like a punch card or something to encourage retention, to encourage you coming back to them. Revenuing is very easy. Hopefully, your money's coming in, and not just coming in and going up to the right, because that's we call that a vanity metric. Just making money is at a steady rate is probably not enough. You want to actually look at the growth rate. So are you actually growing? Are you making progressively more money quarter over quarter, as opposed to growing at a flat rate? Because a flat rate generally is not sustainable these days. And then referral, again, you can, if a new customer comes in, you've probably filled out surveys where it's like, how did you find out about us? That's what they're trying to measure. They're trying to measure the virality and the referral step of their funnel, right?
We were actually reminded about that half of the way. So only half of the participants have filled that question, the other half did not. So
okay.
We added that question, I think, in the advertising.
It's great. I should have given you the talk before we had this talk. So yeah, that's kind of a framework for you to think about the metrics you write for your funnel. And so if you go back to the lean canvas up here, as you think about filling this in, it's quite common to have basically five rows or 5 sentences, one for each step. Like, I'm gonna do ads and measure click through of my ads, and then I measure how many people land on my website and stay for like 5 minutes. Then I'm going to measure how many people sign up for my newsletter, and then I'm going to measure how many people subscribe for my product, and I'm going to measure the dollars revenue per month. Okay. And I think that's actually the last thing I had. So just to recap, these are kind of the three methods that you can use to build a data-driven, metrics-driven company from scratch and maximize your chances of success. With that, yeah, I think we're done. Thank you guys very much. Here's my information. So get in touch.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you to Beehive. You guys have been great. I've been here for, this is my 3rd month, I guess, and fortunately we're leaving soon, but hopefully be back. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And then I'll leave this up for you guys if you want to take a picture. I should have. This is some of the links I promised.
We'll make sure you can take the photo out. You can record the links direct to your emails.
Okay. Then I guess I'll leave that if you guys want to follow up by email or Twitter. Sweet. All right. Q&A.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned wanting to take, for example, from the audience and try to run it through the.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Happy to do that.
So if anybody is starting their own business and would like to volunteer to have this idea, they send it on the models we talked about. No.
Yeah, if you're thinking of starting something, you don't have to tell us the details if you're afraid we're going to steal your idea. But if you want to benefit from all of our brains here in the room, and we can try to dissect your idea and give you some things to think about. Okay. Okay. Okay, when you say offices, you mean? Okay.
We are just thinking, right, service.
I see they're making like graphic design or is it designing. Okay, okay, okay. Okay. Okay, so let me make sure I understand. So the company is, you guys, like, let's say I'm building a house, and then I call you, and you guys, I call a company that will design my house in CAD. Okay. Great. And then the company that made the design gives it to their customers to try. Okay. I see. And do they ever find out about you, or you're just kind of in the background? They think they're working directly with the designer, and the designer just has a cool VR thing, and that's you. Okay, great. Do you want us to go through it? All right. So just as an example, obviously we're not going to be critical of your business idea, but we'll just talk about how you fill this out, right? So again, the idea is so you guys provide basically a VR experience for designers so they can showcase their work to their customers. So starting with the customer segment, right? So the customer segment for you guys would be companies that do 3D designs for buildings and interiors, right? So we go ahead and write that down. A good test would be a good thing for you to think about is how big is that market? Where is the market? Is the market here in Saudi? Is the market international? Right? Because I don't know how many interior design companies are there in Saudi. So this would be a good thing to try and quantify and test for yourselves, right? Perhaps there's a bigger market opportunity abroad, or maybe it's domestic, but try to get an idea of what's your addressable market as far as the number of companies that need your service, that are doing interior design. Number two, the problem being solved, right? So that's
Usually there's fit out from these, but finish, that are the contractors, basically. Finish what we do. And then there's the designer that is this one or that
But I think it's a good point overall, though. Is there another customer? Are there other customer segments where technology may be a good fit? You know, are there other places where, you know, they're trying to, you know, visualize something? Maybe it's not interiors, maybe it's something else where your technology could be useful, like maybe medical. Another one that I could think about, like, for example, a doctor needs to visualize for a patient the procedure they're about to undergo. So maybe there's actually other customer segments you could consider testing. So you could actually write a whole other business, a whole canvas here saying, does our idea apply to medical as well? You know, and test that whole new market. Yeah. So that's a great point. The problem being solved, that's the next one, right? And so that's one where, like, basically you want to find out from your customers. Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. Right. I understand, but I don't mean to pick on you in any way, but this is the hardest question for any company. So the question you want to answer is, are your customers, like, is it a must solve problem for your customers? Right. Exactly. So that's a great point, right? So, like, if you come to me as a designer and you're like, okay, we have this cool VR thing, I have to pay you some money, so I have to actually take out my credit card and pay you. So where's that money going to come from? And is it important enough for me to spend on your product? So if you tell me, oh, it's just nice for your customers to see, I might be like, well, my customers are buying from me today already. I don't need this. I'm selling great, you know, it's fine. But then what you just brought up, which is like, but how many times is your design wrong where a customer then comes back and says, I built the wrong house because like I didn't realize this closet is too small. And then it's on me as the designer. And then I have to go, I don't know, they don't want to pay me for the design, right? So a lot of times you have to really find out exactly what the pain point is. And if you, and you talk to them, you literally talk to them and talk to many of them and find out what's the one thing that they keep coming back for, the one thing that when you say, they're like, oh, right. And then that becomes the key marketing message. So maybe it's not, so maybe you're not about visualizing the space. Maybe you're about quality assurance. Maybe your product is the best way to make sure that the designs they have make their customers happy. In physical space. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're not happy with your designer right now, and you probably were never going to work with them again. But you see, so you see, like you got to know exactly what the problem is, and you got to keep asking, you got to keep interviewing your customer to know what really resonates, and that will help you really crack how do you market it and what and exactly what you build. And you know your customers really well. It's just a matter of like writing down in as much detail and much precision what's the exact problem and measuring how painful it is. And there's tools like you could say, you know, you can go to your customers and say, how unhappy would you be, or how much money would you lose if our product went away? That's a very common question you can ask your customers, and they could say, oh, you know, it's okay, you know, we'll be fine, and that's not a good sign for you. They have to say, my world is going to end. I'm going to lose so much business if your product goes away. And if they say that, then you know you're really onto something. You're really solving a painful problem. Do you have something in mind?
No,
like consumer stuff like Instagram, like I can't explain why stuff like that is successful. I think it's like drugs for your brain. Like if you know, I can't explain what problem Instagram is solving. We could have a long conversation. That's why I'm not in consumer startups. On photos, yeah. Right. Maybe the problem there, maybe people are lonely and they just want to look at stuff or bored. You know, it's I don't understand. I'll be the first to admit I don't understand consumer. I think consumer stuff gets a bit hard with this. So just to keep going, revenue streams. I think you know you're aware where that's coming from. Always this also invites you to ideate. Are there other revenue streams you could be doing? You could maybe go to like someone's building a new building, and you know they're selling apartments, and maybe you guys can partner and bring a new revenue stream by helping them with VR, help people visualize the apartments before buying them. You know, so you could think about, are there other ways to bring in money? The solution, I think it's clear. UVP very much tied to how you talk about it will very much be tied to the problem you're solving. The channels, I don't know, how do you market it today? Yeah. Uh-huh. like an interior design event. Yeah. Right. Right. So are there other channels, right? Are you is that where your customers are spending most of their time? Are they at events with COVID? They're not at events anymore, right? So where are they spending their time? Are they maybe they're scrolling Instagram, right? Maybe they're reading. Right, direct sales, right? Exactly. Yeah. So you basically go ahead and list all of that and evaluate the effectiveness of each channel. And you'd really try to quantify how it's converting. So from the flyers you gave out, if you, let's say you're giving out flyers at a trade show, you really want to make sure like there's a QR code or something where you can actually literally count how many people converted. You know, not just how many people took the flyer is it's probably a great metric, but also how many people actually went to your website after and put a real dollar amount, how many of them actually became paying customers. And that's how you've quantified that channel. Then you can compare against Instagram ads, or maybe you sponsor a podcast that's for interior designers. And again, you give people in the podcast, they say, sign up for this product for 10% free with code, whatever. And then when they sign up with that code for your product, they call, then you can literally be like, this podcast, we spent, you know, $1,000, we got 3 signups. And you really want to be very meticulous about measuring each of your channels. I think, yeah, you brainstorm all your channels and you use your gut feel to prioritize which one will be the most effective. Then you measure it. And then if it's the most effective, then usually most startups will end up with one really effective channel. So if you find the one that's doing great, then probably you're in a good shape. But maybe you'll see the trade shows is really, you know, maybe there's another channel that you can test that's doing even better. So yeah. All right. And sorry, just to finish the metrics, we could talk about that if you're interested, but the unfair advantage in your case, I think is pretty strong, right? Because VR is a new space and it's a space that not a lot of people understand. So I think you guys are in a good position to have something, you know, there's a wow factor to it. It's probably hard for people to learn VR. So I think you're in a good position for now. Further down the line, I think VR is going to probably get more and more common in 20, 30 years. So like, I think in the long term, you might want to worry about how do you make your business even more, maybe get some patents, maybe develop some hardware that's yours alone. But I think for now, with VR, you're in a good place. You're on the cusp of a new technology trend. That's yeah. I mean, commit to it for sure. There's a risk obviously with VR as well because it's so new, but yeah. Question. Sorry? Yes. My advice is that like you should never sacrifice your mental health or relationships for a company. You really shouldn't. I think you want to set up your life in a way where if you're going to take that plunge, you have enough of a fallback or a safety net to go back to. I think you want to give yourself a time frame. So you want to say, I'm going to spend, I've saved up enough for 3 years worth of experimenting with this. And then at the end of 3 years, I'll be able to get another job, or I'll still have a place to live, still have a family. And that's how I would do it. I wouldn't do the whole sleeping under the desk at work and, getting divorced, and, it's not worth it. It's really not worth it. So I personally, I made sure, I have enough of a financial safety net to go back to, that I have a home to live in before I went and did the plunge. And, we had a drop dead date for our business. We didn't pay ourselves for 2 years. And I knew that was fine financially, but then I knew after that we'd have to stop or raise capital. And we ended up raising capital. But if we hadn't, then it would have been the end, and I would have had to move on. And that's why I'm saying, don't let the passion drive you into the ground. I've seen people do it. It's not worth it. Sure, yeah. Absolutely. Are we got 15 minutes? If anybody needs to go, I think maybe we give folks a chance to. If anybody's got someplace to be.
I think we've announced that it's a big for an hour and a half.
Okay.
But as an additional incentive, we do think some space for work and stay what you have during the
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
conversation.
Sure.
Okay. So we prepared a couple of questions based on the demographic we got to register on our form, and so we were trying to ask questions for everybody